Hello, and welcome back to another exciting episode of JavaScript Jabber. We're at number...
A lot.
In the N.
N+1.
Yeah. There you go.
We're in the off by one error show.
We're in the episode you're listening to right now.
That's right. All right. That's right. And that gives us a good segue to introduce Jack Harrington. Welcome as our guest.
Hi, I'm from React Roundup. Another podcast on this esteemed channel.
Yeah.
We talk about a framework you might know a little bit about, I guess, React.
I don't know anything about it.
Written with JavaScript. Okay, fantastic.
I think you refuse to know anything about
it. I love it.
And we got TJ.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, TJ Van Tol, also from the React Roundup show. And you guys should introduce yourselves as well, because this is also on the React Roundup feed. So we've got people that don't know your voices either.
Well, I'm AJ. I'm the resident contrarian. I'm the old man that yells at clouds, especially in the cloud.
You're also the most senior member of all the podcasts except for Chuck, maybe. I think
that I am equally senior to Chuck. I think I was on the first one. I'd have to go back and look. Maybe I wasn't on the first one, but very, very early on, yeah.
Are we going by age, or are we just going by time on the podcast?
No, I think I take you all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then we got Dan.
Yeah, the old man. Hi, I'm Dan Shappir. Also on the JavaScript Jabber podcast. Also use React quite a lot. So I'm actually, like I said before we started, a fan of the React Roundup podcast and a big fan of Jack's videos, which everybody who's into React should be watching.
Thanks for the shout out, man. I appreciate that.
I actually shouted your videos as some of my picks on JavaScript Jabber, just so you know.
Okay. Thank you. That was great.
Can we hear more about these videos? Because I am not aware. I don't know the names in the framework that shall not be named community.
Yeah. Okay. So I run a YouTube channel called Blue Collar Coder. The idea is that I'm self-trained, started coding when I was 13, sort of thing, and so I take this kind of workmanly approach to building applications. I'm more very customer focused, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's kind of what I bring to my videos is sort of like, hey, we want to do this. This is how we get it done. It's not a lot of theory. It's more, or if the theory is applied, we kind of bring the theory in that way through actual implementation. And so we talk a lot about React and all that.
Sorry for interrupting you, but
no, please go for it.
You got into coding like the self-taught, unofficial sort of way?
Yeah, totally. I taught myself to code. I'll date myself. I taught myself to code TRS-80 Basic on the TRS-80
Been there,
Model
done
1.
that. The Trash 80?
Yeah. The Trash 80. Great machine. 4K. Or 16K with the upgrade.
That was actually the first computer that I coded on as well.
Yeah,
just so you know.
It's a great introductory machine, and it was really fun because back in the day you could actually make stuff individually that would build that you could give your friends and all that sort of thing. And I think you still can nowadays, but that's definitely what got me interested in coding. I was a failure in everything else, but it was the one thing I could actually do. So I kind of kept with that for my entire career. I've never gone to college, and now I'm super stoked because my daughter is now like an intern at Apple, she's done the whole thing where, she is 4.0 EE, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, look, Apple fell way far away from the tree, so that's good.
So my equivalent experience was at around that age, I was building GeoCities websites. That was sort of so if you remember all the old school animated GIF, autoplay music, scrolling text, I was totally into that.
You got to make the snowflake background. And, when winter came around, all that. Yeah.
Custom scroll bar, custom cursor, right? You had to have one of those. The whole thing, right?
But that teaches you the fundamentals, DOM manipulation, maybe some jQuery, that sort of thing.
It's funny because
jQuery was not around back then.
No,
Really?
this is the 90s, so this predates jQuery by quite a bit.
Well, I think I was using jQuery 95. I think wasn't I?
No, there was no internet in 95.
Sorry, my bad. No, what do you mean? There was no internet in 95? Okay, you're right. 2000, I was using jQuery.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Okay, you're right.
It seems some important dates. JavaScript itself was created in 95, was really officially released in 96. And an IE4, which was really the first browser to actually have what we would consider a DOM, I think came out at 97 or 98. And then when did Ajax arrive to get the XML
HTTP request? Yeah, right. Which is,
I think that was IE 5.5 or something.
Yeah.
Well, just to ground us here, jQuery's initial release was in 2006. So
way
a decade later.
Really?
Yeah. So you're off by about 11 years, Jack.
Okay, I heard about it in 2007 or 8, probably 2008. The thing was, there was a kid who was, I don't know, 7 years old or something. A kid that was way too young that gave a Google Tech Talk, and that was one of the things that launched jQuery even further, because it was a Google Tech Talk. And it's a 7-year-old explaining, like, I use jQuery.
These days it will be a 6-year-old explaining why they use React Server components.
Yeah.
And maybe he can finally do a good job at it. I love Dan Abraham going around like, it's so simple.
Oh, by the way,
like, what are you talking about? What do you mean it's simple?
So just so you know, we actually had Dan on our show.
Okay.
So the episode hasn't come out yet at the time of this recording, but I think it should come out this week. So effectively, by the time this is released, it will obviously be out already, probably as a 2-episode thing, because it was a over 2-hour-long conversation that we had with him. He was really doing the rounds with all the podcasts and a lot of the also interviews with Kent C. Dodds and others on YouTube, etc., really trying to get the word out. I think they are experiencing more pushback than they expected, although it's not really surprising. But so he's...
It wasn't entirely. It's basically phase 3, right? It's MCU phase 3. It's he had like phase 2 was hooks, and then phase 3 is basically, hey, server is cool again. And
but that's really an interesting thing, I have to say, because we had episodes on React before, and we're kind of going off on a tangent here. What? Maybe we finish the introductions first, because you guys introduced yourselves.
We've not even done that.
And AJ and I didn't actually. So before we go on tangents about React, let's get back to the introductions, maybe.
Sounds good.
I feel like I sufficiently introduced myself, but I did find, yes, I am in the very first episode along with Jameson Dance and Chuck, and then the second episode we brought on Yehuda Katz.
Maybe it's worthwhile mentioning to the younger generation what Yehuda actually did, or maybe still does.
Yeah, the name is super familiar. I've forgotten what he does.
So, oh man, he's responsible for the atrocity that is imports. I remember that part. I've forgiven him, but well, he was a Ruby guy, and I'm thinking, I don't remember what it was at the time. Maybe he was doing Ember, which I think back then had a different name. I don't remember. Do you, Dan?
No, I don't. I remember that he's really well known, or was well known, but I also forget for what. By the way, I've actually, unlike you, I actually liked imports almost from day one. My one big problem with imports is that they're kind of upside down. It should be, rather than import from, it should be from import, if you think about it.
And he's... Wait,
because because Jack, you're making a face for our
yeah.
audience.
Sorry, yeah.
Because once you say where you import from, it can deduce what you could import from there. Whereas going the other way around is more problematic.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I gotta say, in VS Code, I found that like just typing in the key term, if you've named things nicely, and you hit tab for the completion, it just auto imports it. It never gets the ordering right, so I end up having to go back and kind of restack ordering because I'm a little bit, little intense about the ordering my imports and whatnot.
Otherwise, but it feels like tooling compensating for deficiency in the language or something.
That's JavaScript's middle name, tooling. Compensating for the shortcomings in the language.
Yeah, there is something to that. Okay, so now it's my turn. I also my name is Dan Shappir. I've been on JavaScript Jabber a lot less than AJ has been on it. I've been on for coming on 4 years. Time flies when you're having fun. I'm also an old-time developer, having also started coding on the Trash 80 way back when in the 80s. Unlike you guys, though, I did go, even though I was really into computers as a kid, I did go through the more quote-unquote official route of getting university degrees. So I have bachelor's and master's degrees in computer science because interesting things, and the interesting point is that nothing that I learned in university is something that I still use today.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And that should not be a surprise to anybody who has more than 5 years into this. Like, it's everything's just going to change.
Yeah,
it's funny what
go for it.
Because I also did the quote unquote traditional route as well. And what I tell people is that I actually got more out of the writing classes and the speaking classes.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't learn things in the computer science stuff, but it's amazing how somewhat irrelevant that is to the day-to-day operations of just a software developer. So I got some out of it, but like just the general skills of being able to read more effectively, I got quite a bit out of that along the way too.
I do think, though, that there's more I get why a lot of people are kind of, to a certain extent, dismissive, I might even say, of university studies of computer science. But looking at a framework like React and at, let's say, a TypeScript, there's a lot of, computer science in there.
For sure.
The whole functional thing, immutability, and so on and so forth. So it can be challenging, I think, for somebody who's totally self-taught and didn't have good mentorship to really get into this stuff.
Right. I definitely benefited from, I mean, you were there at TRS-80 Model 1 Basic. I mean, what was I went through APL, C, Fortran 77,
you
C,
went to APL?
C++. Yeah, we had APL. We had a computer with APL.
With a funny keyboard with the Greek letters?
Yeah. There's a flip switch between Basic and APL.
For the listeners who are way too young to know about it, APL is this like crazy math-inspired programming language where you work with vectors and matrices as if they were basic types, and you literally type math expressions using Greek letters, and that's the code you run. And that's nuts.
Yeah,
you need special keyboards to program with it.
Right. Anyway, so but I mean, having gone through all of that, and then I would go, and I had friends who were going to CS at the time, and so I would read books on data structures and all that sort of stuff. So I basically kind of osmosed a lot of that as I rolled along. But I mean, when it comes to like somebody coming into the profession now, I mean, I think there's sort of the practical stuff, and then there's the sort of theoretical stuff.
I think it's the other thing is the quality of the instruction you're given as well, because nowadays YouTube exists, right?
Yeah.
Jack's videos are one click away, and I mean, back in the day, you didn't have easy access to that stuff, so
right.
Colleges kind of like was the only way you were going to get that sort of hands-on instruction.
That's for sure.
And
that's true.
And now, like, you can pay significantly less to get some extremely high quality material and just watch it from the comfort of your own home. And I don't know, it's still a difficult, I mean, we could talk the rest of the episode about this because it's a deep conversation, but it is sort of fascinating because I know all sorts of people that are going through this conundrum because college is so absurdly expensive.
Yeah, that's the thing I wanted to say about the U.S. The U.S. Higher education is extremely and especially expensive in the U.S., which is nuts because the one thing a country wants is for as many of its citizens to have, proficiency in stuff. So
stuff. Yeah, I know, and that's a weird thing. Living in America, it's actually not a commonly held opinion. Like that's up for debate as to whether higher education is actually a good thing. Not a debate for me. I think it is, but
I think that part of the reason that it's certain people dismiss it has to do with the fact that it's so absurdly expensive that it's difficult to justify its cost in terms of the benefits that you get. But if it was like a tenth of the price, then the story would be, totally different.
Right. Yeah. Which is kind of, I think, where boot camps fit in, right? Boot camps are essentially a tenth of the price of a traditional college education, and they get you, certainly a good grounding. Look, here's a question for y'all. Like, actually, here's a generalized question. How many years? Let's just say I'm I don't know, I'm doing some other job, right? I wash paintbrushes or whatever, and I want to get into computer science. I want to get into being a web developer. Like, how many years realistically does it take?
So I've been thinking about this, and my conclusion is that you first kind of need to define what a web developer is. And by the way, we had interesting conversations about these very topics with some of our guests. We had Danny Thompson on our show.
Mm-hmm.
We had Sam Sycamore on our show, and Laura Harvey, and some other great people. I recommend going back and listening to those episodes for our listeners who have not. And it really depends on what you mean by a web developer. Because a web developer could be somebody on the one end of the scale, it could be somebody working in WordPress or Wix, building websites. And on the other end of the scale, it could be somebody working on the next version of Grafana using whatever framework that's built in. So or let's say building, if I gave somebody using Wix, it could be somebody who's building the Wix editor, which would be like the other end of the spectrum. So it really kind of depends. Now you can get to both of these places either from university or boot camp, and I know people, some of the, like the people who founded Wix don't actually have, at least some of them don't actually have a college education. So it's not a prerequisite even if you're building the next Wix, but it really depends on where you want to get to and what your goals are.
Okay, so React developer. Let's take that. Let's just go there.
And even with React development, I'm sure that you run into a lot of people who are using React without really having a deep understanding of how React works. And all of these frameworks that are built on top of the web platform kind of inherit from the web platform itself a very forgiving attitude towards neglecting coding best practices, might I say.
I would argue that actually React is like the worst when it comes to that in terms of like you need to know your stuff when it comes to references and
yes and no,
and immutability, and in order to really not get bit in the butt by React on a regular basis.
But let's say that instead of re-rendering once or twice, the component that you built re-renders 100 times and leaks memory. So what? Still works.
I mean, well, it depends on and it depends on what you're building it for. If it's on like your personal site or for some small business, there's a good chance no one's going to notice or ever care about that. If it's for like the homepage of Amazon.com, like that's problematic. So it depends.
You would assume that Amazon is more discerning, let's say, about who they let work on their homepage, and the review processes and the tests that they have in place. And again, if you're really into it, it's there's nothing to get in your way of getting there. I mean, again, you're a great example yourself, Jack, of being self-taught and now actually teaching people and including a lot of really deep concepts about how React worked on the insides. And by the way, I loved your videos where you kind of do it yourself on top of Vite to show how things work inside of Next or Remix. I really love it when you do that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's pretty hairy nowadays. React's getting complex.
Yeah, for sure.
But y'all are prevaricating around the bush here. Like I'm random Joe X. I'm in I meet you in the gym. Like, hey, what do you do? I'm a software developer. How long does it take to get into that?
Well, again, if
React, go.
But I might not even send them React way. I might send them towards WordPress or Wix, because if they really want to start making, some money quickly and effectively, I mean, why not? There are way more sites built using WordPress than there are websites built using React. I
did an interview with a guy once who is all into WordPress themes, and he made bank on that. I was like, okay, I didn't even know there's a whole subgenre.
There's that ongoing meme that I hate about I'm a PHP developer. Here's my Lambo.
Well, that's an interesting one, because I think that actually is a cultural. That's a cultural thing. We do suffer from open source-itis, and open source is a cancer. It is life sucking.
I have to listen to this podcast more often. Whoa. Okay.
But it is. It's like, oh, look, a cool growth. And then it's like, oh, it's killing me. It's a good marketing gimmick, and it's a good bad religion to sell people that are looking for something to believe in. But it's a cancer. So you gotta give credit to people.
Just to make sure that I understand what you're rallying against. Not the concept. If I understand correctly, it's not the concept of open source so much as the overuse of open source in people's projects. Or am I misunderstanding you?
It's not the overuse. It's actually the concept, because you think like, oh, because I used to be in that camp, and I still like the idea of information wants to be free. But the reality is, if you create something useful and you spend your time doing that, and it's truly useful, someone else is going to spend their time making money off of what you did, right? And so people that actually charge for their libraries, I have a lot of respect for them for having the good sense to do that, because the people that are charging for their libraries, so I'm going to call WordPress themes, those are libraries. They're just libraries of CSS and components.
A little bit of JavaScript. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But those people had the foresight to say, hey, I want to be able to do this today and still be able to do it tomorrow. And that's
I mean, it's an
something
old
that-
saying that, you know, if you're good at something, don't do it for free.
Yeah, but we might be upsetting Richard Stallman by saying this, but the reality
he
is
needs
that
to be upset.
yeah,
And he's listening.
yeah, for sure. I'm sure he's listening. For those of you who don't know, he's like kind of the OG of open source. He invented GPL. He created Emacs. He cursed out Steve Jobs. He did a lot of things.
Didn't know that last one.
Yeah,
Cool.
he basically said that he was happy he was dead or something along these lines.
Oh,
Yeah.
whoa.
But yeah, but anyway, my point is, well, the point that I was going towards is that these days, as opposed to several years ago, people working on successful open source projects usually find some way to make a living off of it, or to at the very least make it worth their while. Either actually making money from it, or at the very least having their career benefit from it. Or maybe they enjoy being flown to conferences, so that's what they're getting from it. But they're getting something from it these days. So it's that's at least the way that it seems.
A lot of companies that use that would then go and hire you to work
think about
that.
all the frameworks. All the frameworks in the React land are open source, and all of them have people are associated with it that are making money or raised money or working somewhere. Somebody's paying them for working on the open source.
Yeah,
but that's the exception, and not only that, but it was a marketing gimmick by Facebook, right? I mean, yes, somebody created it because he wanted to create it, but it was a marketing gimmick, and it was a very, 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 very successful marketing gimmick to have that open sourced
for recruiting
gimmick,
people.
But
recruiting.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at the general case, so the core JS guy, I think, is the more common case, right? Remember, for the last 2 or 3 years, you got this thing every time you did an npm install that said, "Hey, I'm looking for a good job," which, the way that it was phrased, you could tell the guy was bitter, right?
Yeah.
Because he
should have said
he should have changed his message slightly. And part of it is, I'm not sure. I think he was a native English speaker. I think parents were Russian. He was American, if I'm correct. I might be wrong. Now he's stuck in Russia, and there's all this Ukraine stuff. He can't get any money because if you were to pay him, you're a terrorist, right? And so because of things happened and the way that it worked out with his visa, and so he's trying to be this like philanthropist, but really he's digging himself a hole. And somebody said that in one of the comments. I went through one of the posts that came out recently with him, because he basically, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but he made a crybaby post. It's like, hey, my life sucks, and I've tried to help people, and all I'm doing is trying to help people, and my life sucks, and it keeps getting worse. And somebody basically said, well, you need to man up and start, get a real job. It doesn't, but the other problem is, look at Express, right? The most popular JavaScript server in the world. More APIs run on Express than anything else, right? We're going to talk
but
APIs.
That's
no maintainers, no money, no
but
sponsorship.
That was created a while ago and to an extent effectively abandoned, like you're saying. If you look at like Fastify or whatever is supposed to replace it, the people do have some sort of a business plan associated with it, as far as I understand.
Right. And so in that case, but that's the thing, is if you don't have a plan to make money, it doesn't end well for you, and it doesn't end well for your customers, which what do we call open source users? It doesn't end well for your users because they didn't become customers.
Yeah.
I think it just depends what you're going into it and what you're wanting to get out of. I don't think very many people go in super naive nowadays. The open source
I think they do. I think
rules of the road are pretty well established. I don't know. It sort of depends on what perspective you're coming out of.
Yeah.
But what Dan had mentioned earlier, just what you get out of open source, he's basically telling my personal story, because I got into open source. One of the reasons I know the jQuery timeline really well is because I was on the jQuery team as part of jQuery UI for a few years.
I use that.
And so I put it up. Yeah, it was an awesome framework. And I put in a lot of time, like a lot of thankless work into that project that I got no direct financial compensation for. But I feel like that time investment is paid off over and over again, just in terms of the notoriety I got from that, the exposure I got from that. Right.
And going back to an earlier point, the mentorship, right? It gives you the ability to work on a really good team.
Yeah.
And I think so many people are hamstrung by that.
It gave me perspective beyond just the little insurance company I was working on, right?
And that was 8 or 10 years ago. And now what I'm saying is that not always, and there are always exceptions to every rule, but it seems that in the general sense, things are better now in that regard than they used to be. That's what I'm trying to say. It's still not perfect. It's far from perfect, but it's better than it used to be. So it seems to me. But going back to your question, Jack, I think somebody can be a React newbie fairly quickly. I think that you can be like a
6 months,
a
year,
6 months. I think that within 6. I think people forget how simple React is at its core in a lot of ways. So if you're not being overly fancy about it and you don't mind leaking memory and overly re-rendering, then you can write crap code that works. If you want to be truly proficient in React, I would say that it really depends on your experience, obviously. But if you're like like from a boot camp, let's say, and you're not like super genius, then I would say somewhere from 4 to 10 years.
Okay. All right. TJ?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Obviously, the answer to this is really it depends, like any good technology question. But I think that's about right. I think new people really struggle with, to be a modern quote unquote web developer, the amount of things that you're expected to at least know or be aware of is kind of nuts, because you can get into, well, should you know source control? Should you know HTTP? Should you know how, and like the list, we could make a list of 20, 30 things that we're probably all like moderately familiar with. But, and I think that's where like the 4 to 10 years feels about right before you at least have a basic understanding of all those things. But I tend to agree with Dan that like you can do quick and dirty stuff within about six months to a year. Like wouldn't be someone I trust on my production website, but if somebody just needs to go in and start with some junior tasks and has somebody to sort of look over their code and teach them, I think you can start building things, right, and have a basis. Everybody's got to start somewhere.
AJ?
And if you limit the scope of it, I think it makes it a lot easier. And then over time you can introduce all that other stuff.
Yeah. AJ, what do you think?
I really don't know. I don't know how to put a timeline to it. I think that because everybody's different, and there's that quote about, are you having 4 years of experience or the same 4 years of or the same year of experience 4 times?
Yes.
I
like
think
active learning versus just like doing the same things over and over and over again, right? Active learning is you're pushing your boundaries as you learn.
But that's the thing about React. I mean, every 3 years or whatever, React totally changes, and then you start from scratch. So you can't stay in place. I mean, what are you still using? Create class or whatever.
You would be surprised how many people still use create class, or not create class, but like classes. I don't know if anybody is using create class.
I think it's very different whether you're approaching it as a job or a craft. Because the thing is, I didn't get into programming because I was thinking, gosh, I got to start looking for a job. And so that gives me a completely different perspective. I got into programming because I wanted a creative outlet to change things that weren't what I wanted them to be. So I saw problems, and then I was like, I wonder if I could do this. And for me, it started with probably, I mean, just tinkering back in middle school. I added a basic script that would prompt for a password before Windows 95 would boot. I don't know why I did it. And then it progressed to the calculator, and I wanted to write a program that would help me solve my physics problems, where there was only basically 4 permutations of the homework, right? And so I could just write it, either you're solving for distance, or you're solving for speed, or you're solving for maybe it was acceleration or something. It was like you're solving for one of these things. And so I just wrote all 4 permutations of it in my calculator, and then I knew that I'd get the right result. And it kind of progressed from there. It's just I realized, like I can write little snippets of script and little snippets of code, and it started as just a few lines. And then it got to the point where I realized, whoa, people want to pay me for this.
Right, there used to be a saying about the software developers back in the day that good software developers are always surprised by how much people are willing to pay them to do something they would do for free. But
yes, that's great.
But but here's the thing: it's especially these days that this is not true for everybody. I think it's true for everybody who's probably a podcaster. And it's probably more true for people who are listening to podcasts, but it's not necessarily true for the industry at large. There are a lot of people these days who are in it in order to make a living.
Totally. Where's my 70K gig? That's what I was promised. It was, I learned this gobbledygook, and then you give me my 70K. And that's okay. But at a certain point, like, you're going to be limited in the upper boundary if you have that mentality going forward. You really need to get into exactly what AJ was talking about, which is tinkering, right? That's how he knows how to code. He kind of took things apart. How does it work? Learn more, keep going, get fascinated by this, and then you get into that world where it gets really fun.
Also, a lot of people just get into management, and then they don't need to deal with the tech anymore at all.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing how much those skills atrophy. Like, me, a guy who's been in management for like a year. It's like, I don't know, code. What is that again?
By the way, that's a very dangerous place to be in. As a side rant, it's perfectly legitimate for people to go the management route. Somebody has to do it. And there are some people who turn out to be really good at it and enjoy it and, advance or found companies or whatever, or become, CTOs or CEOs of huge software, organizations or whatever. But for people who are stuck in middle management, that's a very risky position to be in, because in the downturn, you're one of the first to go, because upper management is not going to fire themselves, obviously. And they also need the actual developers to actually produce the code. So instead of one manager for every 4 developers, we'll make do with one manager for every 6 or 8 developers. And voila, we cut out half of middle management. And in previous downturns, I've seen a lot of middle managers trying to get back into coding, and it's hard.
I've seen that too, because I've been mostly working DevRel for the last decade or so. And even though coding is a part of my job as DevRel, right? I have to run demos and all that sort of stuff. It's different working on those sort of apps versus working on like a really important big production app. It's just different. Like it's less real. And so in the last year or two, I've sort of forced my way into a role where I am doing like working on an actual big web app, because I found that otherwise, if I'm not in there, if I'm not in the trenches on a day-to-day basis, it's just not the same. It's just not the same experience.
Yeah, for sure. I can sympathize, because a lot of my job as a performance tech lead also has to do with jumping between projects. And then sometimes I don't get to dig in as much as I would like. And I even get like pushback from managers saying, well, it's not for you to dig in. You should tell the developers what they should be doing, and you should be moving on to the next project. Sometimes I kind of, dive deep behind their back.
It's hard not to, you find that problem solving, that's what we all get excited by. You know, you see something. I love it when somebody has a comment in one of my threads. You know, when one of my videos is like, you know, oh, I tried that and that doesn't work, and you know, I'm like, or whatever, and they come up with some random permutation, and you're like, wait, what? And I'm like, give me the code. I want to see how you messed this up, because it's interesting to me how you messed it up, because then for every one person come to me and say I messed it up, there's 100 people that don't say that. And it's amazing how.
By the way, I cannot look at code without automatically starting a code review process. So I remember, you know, just a few days ago, I was looking at some code with one of the team leaders at Next Insurance where I work, and she was asking me about, you know, some code, why it works some way and not some other way, why it should be implemented like this and not like that. And I was going like, yeah, but why is that variable named like this?
You can't help yourself.
I can't help myself.
Oh, yeah. What do you mean you use a var? What the heck?
I think it gets back to AJ's point about motivation earlier making a big difference, because I feel like that's the thing. To answer your question, Jack, if some random person came up to me in public somewhere and asked about it, I think like the reason that question is hard to answer is because I found that the people who are really good at software development and really like it are the ones that have a natural interest, something in it that just makes you really enjoy and interested. The same thing that makes Dan see code and instantly think about variable names and stuff like that. That's just something that's kind of baked into you. So I feel like if you find somebody who has that, I think that's why it makes sense for everybody to try it at some point in their life, right? To see if that's something that appeals to you. But I think like it's like anything else in life. If it's something you're not interested in doing or it doesn't click, you're going to have a hard time fighting against that.
Yeah,
sort of force yourself. Same reason people have trouble. Like if you don't like going to the gym, well, you're going to have a constant struggle in life trying to force yourself to do it. It's the same thing. Like I'm sure I could have been a lawyer in life, but like I can't stand reading things like legal documents or anything like that. So it would have been a life of pain trying to do it, right? I'm sure it's technically possible, but if you have interest in it and your brain tends to work that way and likes the sort of puzzle solving nature of coding, you're going to be proficient a lot faster than somebody who doesn't have that natural interest.
Also, you can't ignore the fact that we've either been lucky or a product of certain amount of privilege. Not everybody has these opportunities. I would like to pull us back, though, in a different direction, because, you know, we were talking about the fact that if you kind of disconnect from the technology, it's very easy to lose track because things tend to change so quickly. And, you know, if we talk about React for a minute, React, like Jack, I don't remember if you said this before the show or during the show, that React is kind of like, what did you call it? Like stage, like...
Oh, it's in phase 3.
Phase 3, that's it. Like taking the Marvel kind of thing. It might even be phase 4, depending on how you count it. Because we moved from create class to classes, then from classes to hooks. And even then, like, it's not just, you know, classes versus create class. It's higher order components versus mutexes. So mixin, there was a mixin period, and then higher order components, and then hooks. So we did go through a couple of phases along the way. So and one of the things that you said or hinted at before we started recording is that this phase appears to be less popular than previous phases, or the transition to this phase seems to be getting more pushback than previous ones.
It's a different pushback. I mean, there was certainly some pushback against hooks, although I would say functional components had come out a couple. God, obviously my timelines are awful, but like I want to say they at least came out a year ahead of hooks.
Well, way longer than that, by the way.
Okay, cool. All right, so a couple of years before hooks, and so that gives people a little bit of time to get into it, right? And then Hook came around and be, I guess my functional components can do more now. Awesome. Okay, cool.
The way I remember, like, by
RSCs,
the way, just a comment. The way I remember it, and I might be mistaken, is that functional components came out alongside classes. that we got classes together with functional components, but that hardly anybody was actually using functional components and everybody was using classes. Because the problem with functional components was that the likelihood that you would need some sort of a state in the component was fairly high, at least the way that people were writing the code back then. And the transition was kind of painful because you effectively needed to do a lot of rewriting of boilerplate code to go from a functional component to a class-based component.
I'm going to rebut that a little bit because I think at the time, as I recall, the common wisdom was a Redux. Like you never put any state inside of a component outside of maybe at best
that happened a bit later.
State, and then okay, fair enough. And so your functional components were okay because you're going to be wrapping them
with the higher order components and stuff like
exactly,
that.
And you're going to get your state from there.
You might be correct.
Yeah. So whatever, phase 2, phase 3, but I do think your assessment is right. I think there's a lot of folks pushing back on RSCs. One, they don't see the value of it. Like our SSR isn't as important to them as it does. It seems to be. I think there was this weird vibe in the community. Like SSR was true React, like Next.js and that sort of stuff was true React. But now that RSCs are come out, you find out there's actually a big contingent of folks who are like, you know what, SPAs are fine, man. That's what I was doing.
No,
like, I don't need this stuff.
SPAs, SSR is for SPA. If it's not SPA, then it's just server rendered. It's not SSR. For me, the term SSR versus server rendering is the difference of whether or not it's, that phrase that's hardly used anymore, isomorphic code, right. Whether it's the same code running back and back. But let's put it this way. In this day and age of the mobile web and search engines and whatnot, if you're just doing client-side rendering, then either you don't really care about mobile users or you don't care about search engines. Now, there are applications out there that fall into these categories. Like, I don't know if you're writing dashboards or if you're implementing
fully logged in experiences.
Yeah.
We're not going to.
Or like, I don't know, internal enterprise applications where you could care less about your end user. But otherwise, how can you not do SSR?
Well, I mean, I think this is the biggest thing to me going on in the React world the last few years is just people throwing different things at the wall when it comes to server rendering. So you have technology like frameworks like Astro, experimenting with things like Islands architecture. You have React working on React server components. You have Next with their multiple different ways of doing server-side rendering. So
Gatsby
it's a complicated it's a complicated space. And I think some of the pushback on the React world is just dealing with that complexity and not knowing, well, crap, which one of these do I use? I'm just building an e-commerce site. Like somebody just tell me what's the right way of doing this.
Use Shopify.
I feel like we're it.
Or Wix.
Yeah.
Or WooCommerce. Why?
Although Shopify has Oxygen, which is now Remix.
Yeah, but nobody's using that yet. No, seriously. I mean, nobody's using Remix. Hardly anybody is using Oxygen or Hydrogen for building Shopify sites. I think that I'm guessing you could probably count these sites on one hand versus the millions of Shopify websites built on Liquid.
For sure.
But I'm serious though. I mean, if you're implementing an e-commerce site using client-side rendering, you're doing way, way, way more harm than good. Whichever way you look at it. I mean,
okay. I actually do come out of this space. I was working at Nike. I was a principal architect over there, principal architect at Walmart Labs, and we had an MPA architecture. So every experience that you go on to would be a different app. And so, for example, like the carton checkout experiences were universally straight up client side rendered because there was nothing you could do on the server, really. Maybe the header.
Yeah, but at that point, first of all,
it.
those pages don't need to rank, and in those
right, exactly.
in those pages, the customer is already committed, and even then, you're probably doing harm because the likelihood of you losing a customer due to some lengthy delay increases. Let's put it this way. But that's kind of acceptable. But for the homepage, I mean,
no, you're right. Homepage and product detail page in particular.
Yeah,
heavy SSR pages, targets.
Yeah,
but I gotta say that's an interesting thing. That to me is where you start. To TJ's point, the islands architecture, because like
that's
an example,
that's a technicality of SSR.
That is SSR, but it SSR isn't even enough. You have to get to the point where like you're not actually React rendering the header as an example because it's not interactive enough or whatever. It's only mild, like whatever.
We're using at Next Insurance where I work. No relation to Vercel, but we are actually using Next.js for the homepage. Now they do have the advantage of having me, but we are not yet on React Server Components. It's too new. By the way, it's interesting. It used to be a WordPress site, and they moved off of WordPress even before I joined. Now, had I been there, I might not have recommended Next.js for the marketing part of the website. I might have recommended something like an Astro or something like that.
Yeah.
But they were thinking, but two things were guiding them, or us at the time. I had not joined yet. Two things were guiding them when they made that choice. First of all, you don't get fired for choosing React and Next.js.
No kidding. Yeah.
You are able to find developers for React and Next.js. You're able to find components for React and Next.js, lots of code samples, videos by people like Jack, and
events, training,
exactly, and our performance, and again, despite not using server components yet, and hydrating the entire thing. The interesting thing I forgot to mention, we're actually still using WordPress as a headless CMS behind the scenes.
Sure.
Because the marketing people are just used to working with it. So for them, nothing really changed. They keep on putting things into the WordPress backend, only instead of having WordPress render it, it's now being rendered by React and Next.js. And our developers are able to do more sophisticated things with it. Also, they could not really find developers anymore who wanted to work with PHP. So that was becoming a really big problem.
So Dan,
and just to finish that point, just one more thing, performance is really good. We're on for Lighthouse desktop scores something like 98. Mobile is not that great, but it's 74, which is not that bad. And if we're looking at Google Search Console, out of like 1,500 pages that we have on the website, like all of them are scoring good, except for something like 30, which are in the high needs improvement space. So we are, good all over in terms of performance, even though, we're doing the whole hydration thing.
Yeah. I think hydration only gets you when it's time to interactive.
And even there, the biggest problem was pixels, marketing pixels, with the time.
Which you can go and
offload and we actually implement. So one big thing we did relatively recently is actually use PartyTown. And by the way, we had the people from PartyTown on the show. On JavaScript Jabber as well. We used PartyTown, and that improved the situation dramatically, but it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Okay, so Dan, Interestingly, you mentioned like the ecosystem around React, the libraries, the authors, the content, all of that sort of stuff. That's to me, over the past like year, 2 years, I would say, what's really been holding React together. It's not React is sort of doing weird stuff. They're, adding hooks that we don't understand. They're doing this RSC stuff. I don't know. But like the stuff that was, still really good was like tan stack query and MUI and all that sort of stuff. It was, oh wow, that's great ecosystem and tooling around it. And I think that's what is interesting about React 13 and the app router stuff is they're basically saying all that stuff goes away, right? Tan stack query, you might not need that anymore. MUI, it's not even compatible with app router. Like, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see like when Next.js or when that becomes a thing. They're literally saying half the ecosystem goes away, and I don't know if React survives that.